Welcome to the People's Health Briefing, a key component of our Trusted Voices campaign. I'm Dr. Noha Abalada from Roots Community Health, reporting for the week of November 24th, 2025. As health professionals rooted in East Oakland facing some of the widest health disparities in the nation, we're here to bring you timely public health information relevant to us all. Today, after an update on contagious illnesses, we'll dive into information about diabetes, including a segment from today's co-host, Dr. Aslam. First, on respiratory illnesses, the good news is that most, not all, but most of our usual data sources are back up and running. So let's start with epidemic trends for COVID and flu, which have been updated through November 21st. And as a reminder, epidemic trends are forecasts that are based primarily on emergency department data to give us a current sense of community spread. And taking a look at COVID epidemic trends, we can see the growth shown in the shades of purple is concentrated across the Midwest and parts of the Northeast. Many states are in gray, indicating that community activity is stable or not changing significantly at this time. And California and Maine are continuing to decline, while Washington and Hawaii are likely declining as of November 21st. The picture is a little bit different when we look at influenza epidemic trends. Influenza activity is increasing in the vast majority of states across the country. Flu season is certainly underway. As I mentioned last week, there's a bit of concern that a currently circulating flu variant of H3N2 has been identified that may contribute to a more severe flu season. I will point out that this variant emerged after this year's vaccine was formulated, so I've been getting questions about whether people should still get the flu vaccine, even though it might not be a perfect match. The answer is an emphatic yes. In fact, it's even more important to get a flu vaccine this year because of the concern about it being a more severe flu season. So even when there is a vaccine mismatch, vaccination still reduces rates of hospitalization. And also, it's important that more people get vaccinated because this will lower the rates of spread overall. So now is the time to get the flu vaccine if you have not already, and this is recommended for everyone 6 months and up. So while flu is certainly increasing and COVID is likely not too far behind, I still think it's worth noting that the biggest driver of respiratory illness right now, or at least through November 15th, as shown here, is still the common cold. So rhinovirus, enterovirus, represented in the gray line, represents more than 1/4 of respiratory viruses reported to the National Respiratory and Enterovirus Surveillance System, NRVSS, the CDC's voluntary weekly report on the total number of tests performed to detect all these viruses in a clinical setting. And that is followed by the para-influenza virus in yellow. Of course, we anticipate that flu and SARS-CoV-2 will represent an increasing share as we really get into winter. But right now, we are seeing quite a bit of respiratory illness that's not COVID and is not flu. Having said that, we have to keep up our vigilance for flu and COVID because these lead to a greater burden of severe outcomes like hospitalization and death. And also because we have antiviral treatments for these that are only effective if we start them on time. So if started early, we can prevent these severe outcomes. So our best practice remains testing, especially those at risk, to identify the cause of the respiratory illness and then isolating and treating accordingly to prevent severe illness and onward spread. And speaking of severe illness, this is where we look at hospitalizations and death. This graph shows respiratory hospitalization rates overall, and we're starting to see RSV and influenza are sloping up slightly. This graph represents the national trend based on data from about 82% of hospitalizations nationwide, though we know that there is great variability from state to state. The CDC reported on Friday, November 21st, that hospitalization rates for RSV in southeastern and southern states are increasing, and that COVID-19 and influenza hospitalizations overall are low at this time. They also note that respiratory death data were last updated on September 23rd, 2025, so a couple months old right now, and that the next update will occur as soon as data are available. So we will be on the lookout for that. Now, as we know, public health awareness is not just about infectious disease prevention, it's also about chronic conditions and preventing and diagnosing and managing chronic conditions, especially that impact millions, i.e. the public. So this month, November, is Diabetes Awareness Month. So it is a great time to focus on screening and prevention and management of a disease that affects an estimated 38 million people in the United States. So to help us understand the basics as well as some of the latest developments in diabetes, I am pleased to turn it over to today's co-host, Dr. Aslam.
Hi, my name is Dr. Rabia Aslam, and I am a primary care physician here at Roots Community Health. Thank you so much to Dr. Noha and the People's Health Briefing team for having me here today. In honor of November being Diabetes Awareness Month, I wanted to walk through the ABCs of diabetes and share a few important updates in care. So let's start with the basics. Diabetes is a metabolic condition in which your blood sugar or blood glucose becomes too high. Our cells rely on glucose for energy, but if the glucose stays in the bloodstream, it can be harmful to the organs such as our eyes, kidneys, and nerves. So it's important for the glucose to be removed from the bloodstream, and this is done by insulin, which is a hormone that's made in the pancreas. When the body doesn't make enough insulin, or if it doesn't make any, or doesn't use it effectively, then the glucose stays in the bloodstream, and that's what leads to diabetes. So there are three main types of diabetes that we can think about: type 1, type 2, and gestational diabetes. Type 1 diabetes, the body produces almost no insulin. This is an autoimmune condition that someone is either born with or develops usually early in life, although we do see it later on in life as well. The immune system mistakenly attacks insulin-producing cells in the pancreas in type 1 diabetes. In type 2 diabetes, the body still makes insulin, but it does not use it effectively. Something called insulin resistance has developed. And finally, gestational diabetes is seen in pregnant women, and it often resolves after delivery, but it does increase a person's risk of developing type 2 diabetes later on. So as we head to the holidays, especially Thanksgiving, it's important to recognize how large carbohydrate-heavy meals can cause blood sugars to rise quickly. Planning ahead can make a big difference and helps ensure everyone, including people with diabetes, can enjoy the holidays safely. So if you're looking for inspiration, our team has shared a few diabetes-friendly Thanksgiving plate ideas on our Instagram, which is linked in the description. Now let's talk more about why Diabetes Awareness Month matters. Diabetes is extremely common. In 2021, 38.4 million Americans, or 11.6% of the population, were living with diabetes, most of them with type 2. It was also the 8th leading cause of death in the United States that year. We also see differences, and that number is only rising. We also see differences in who is most affected along race and ethnic lines. Diabetes impacts 13.6% of American Indian Alaskan Native adults, 12.1% of non-Hispanic Black adults, 11.7% Hispanic adults, 9.1% of Asian American adults, and 6.9% of non-Hispanic whites. These disparities highlight the importance of both awareness and access to care. Recognizing the signs and symptoms of diabetes is key, especially because nearly 9 million Americans don't know they have diabetes. Some people have no symptoms at all, while others experience symptoms so mild they can be overlooked. Common symptoms include increased thirst, hunger, fatigue, increased urination, especially at night, weight loss, blurry vision, and sores that do not heal. The higher a person's body mass index or BMI, the higher their risk of developing diabetes as well. Family history is also an important contributor. If you are diagnosed with diabetes, one of the most important frameworks for managing your health is the ABCs of diabetes care. A is for A1C, B for blood pressure, and C for cholesterol. Your A1C measures the percentage of red blood cells with glucose attached, giving an average of your blood sugar levels over the past 2 to 3 months. As you can see on this slide, a higher A1C means a higher average glucose over the last 2-3 months, and that includes both fasting and postprandial or post-meal glucose. Patients with diabetes have a higher variation in their glucose levels, so the peaks are higher than those without diabetes. And we'll talk about CGMs a little bit later, but continuous glucose monitoring can give us insight into such patterns. So another reason this is important is that, as you can see on this graphic, a higher A1C also corresponds to higher relative risk of retinopathy or eye disease, nephropathy or kidney disease, neuropathy or nerve damage, and microalbuminuria, which means protein in the urine, which is a sign of kidney disease or a sign that a patient can progress in the future to chronic kidney disease and eventually dialysis. So this is why eye exams, diabetic eye exams are recommended yearly, urine tests are recommended yearly, and blood tests to measure kidney function are also recommended yearly for patients with diabetes. Diabetes-related deaths also increase with increasing A1C. Moving on now to the B of ABCs. For blood pressure, the goal is to stay at or below 130/80, and it should be checked at least every 4 months. The exact goal can vary depending on the age and other risk factors of a patient. Generally, below 130/80 is ideal. As for cholesterol, lowering LDL or bad cholesterol is important to prevent risk of heart disease and strokes. Most patients with diabetes over 40 will be recommended to be on a medication to help manage this number. These ABCs become even more important around the holidays. Thanksgiving meals can be high in salt, which can raise blood pressure, high in carbohydrates, but small steps such as balancing your plate, choosing moderate portions, checking your blood sugar more frequently, and starting off with a salad, progressing to higher carbohydrate foods can help to stay on track and enjoy the day as well. Finally, managing the ABCs is about so much more than just numbers. It's about preventing complications. When diabetes is not well controlled, the risk increases for the various outcomes we talked about earlier: kidney disease, eye disease, nerve damage, heart attack, stroke, heart failure, and serious foot infections. So staying on top of ABCs is one of the most powerful ways to protect your long-term health. As we talk about managing diabetes, it's also important to highlight how much diabetes care has evolved over the years, especially when it comes to monitoring blood sugar. For many people, insulin administration and glucose monitoring used to mean multiple finger pricks a day. But with the development of continuous glucose monitors, or CGMs, the process is transformed into just a few quick swipes on the phone. A CGM uses a tiny sensor placed just under the skin, can be placed by yourself or your primary care provider, and it measures glucose levels 24 hours a day. A small transmitter sends these readings directly to a reader or a smartphone, allowing you and your provider to see your blood sugar trends in real time. This means you can quickly tell if you're trending high and low and take action to keep your blood sugar in range. Time spent in range is a good indicator for health outcomes. The desired range is below 110 for fasting glucose, below 140, up to 180 for after meals. and it can be tailored to the specific patient, but generally that will translate to an A1C less than 7%, which is the goal for diabetic patients. So real-time monitoring makes a huge difference, helps to prevent lows and highs, and can provide much more information than an occasional finger stick check alone. Studies show that CGMs combined with diabetes classes, which Roots also offers, have led to major improvements in health outcomes. Patients can use information from CGMs to make dietary changes. They can note that a certain food or drink is causing a spike in their blood sugar, and then choose, a different food that doesn't do that. Foods have different glycemic indices, and the glycemic index of food means basically that if it's high, then it causes a spike immediately and then a crash. And if it's low, that's better for diabetic patients than otherwise, because it doesn't cause a rapid spike, but rather a slow and steady increase in the glucose. So, it also helps helps providers make decisions about medications. They can see averages of, this patient's blood sugar is always high at midnight. So, perhaps, they can cut out that midnight snack. Or, if it's always high during lunchtime, a certain medication can be dosed at that time. So it can allow both patients and providers to make changes and help improve glucose control. Some CGMs can even connect to insulin pumps to help automate insulin delivery, making day-to-day blood sugar management more precise and personalized. This is generally used for type 1 diabetics. Now, all that said, finger stick checks still have an important place, and it's recommended to keep an unexpired meter and test strips on hand, even with a CGM, to confirm the findings if the CGM is not reading. If you feel unwell and the CGM says your levels are normal, or if the CGM shows rapidly rising or decreasing blood sugars, the finger stick can provide an accurate data point. So, despite all these benefits, not everyone has equal access. Research shows that poorer, older, Black and Brown Americans and individuals covered by Medicaid are significantly less likely to receive CGMs than other groups. Addressing these inequities is a critical part of ensuring that everyone living with diabetes can benefit from the safest and most effective technology available. Another great thing about CGMs is that they can provide a number called GMI, which closely correlates with the A1C, but it's based on the last 2 weeks of average blood sugars. So a patient and provider do not necessarily have to wait a whole 3-4 months for the next A1C and can actually make titration sooner to achieve better glucose control. Now, the next exciting update to share is about GLP-1s. GLP-1 receptor agonists are a group of medications that have been approved by the FDA for well over a decade now for diabetes and more recently for weight loss. GLP-1 stands for glucagon-like peptides because they mimic the natural hormone in the body to lower blood sugar and aid in weight loss. It does this by releasing a hormone that mimics the natural hormone after eating, which acts on different organs, the pancreas, the brain, the stomach, and liver, to release insulin, lower glucose production, and create a feeling of fullness. There is an adjustment period when starting and titrating up this medication, but long-term or chronic users tolerate it very well. And for the right candidates, the benefits really outweigh the risks. So aside from the benefit of weight loss, which is helpful for patients with diabetes who also have obesity, it also has cardiovascular and renal protective benefits, which means that it protects the kidneys and the heart from bad outcomes. Findings from the FLOW trial, the first ever dedicated kidney outcomes trial with a glucagon-like peptide 1 receptor agonist, demonstrated that semaglutide slowed progression of kidney disease in patients with type 2 diabetes and improved both kidney outcomes and cardiovascular mortality. So participants who received semaglutide experienced a 24% risk reduction in the primary endpoint, which included kidney outcomes and death from cardiovascular and kidney causes, compared to those who received a placebo. In addition, a secondary endpoint showed significant improvements with semaglutide, including a reduction of major cardiovascular events by 18% and a reduction of the risk of all-cause death by 20%. So if you have diabetes, definitely discuss this with your primary care provider, whether you're a good candidate for this medication. A challenge with GLP-1 receptor agonists is that because they are being utilized for weight loss, there are intermittent shortages, and that has prompted multiple entities to produce and market compounded formulations of these medications directly to consumers. The American Diabetes Association recommends against using non-FDA approved compounded versions, which are on the market, due to uncertainty about their content, safety, and effectiveness. Now, as we wrap up and look forward to Thanksgiving, just another reminder to make small adjustments like taking a walk after dinner, choosing smaller portions, and staying hydrated can make a big difference in managing diabetes and overall health while still enjoying time with loved ones. Thank you, and I hope this was helpful.
Thank you, Dr. Aslam, for that excellent overview of diabetes understanding and progress. And along those lines, I wanted to discuss a recent development, which is a newly recognized form of diabetes that we should all be aware of called type 5 diabetes. So just this past April 2025, the International Diabetes Federation designated malnutrition-related diabetes as a distinct condition, now referred to as type 5 diabetes. Malnutrition-related diabetes was first described in Jamaica in 1955 and is most commonly seen in young men living in low and middle income countries who have a low body mass index, so low body fat, low body mass index under 19. For decades, it was frequently misdiagnosed as type 1 diabetes because patients would present with a high blood sugar level and needed large amounts of insulin to bring it down. But unlike people with type 1 diabetes, those with type 5 diabetes do not develop ketosis, even with very high blood sugar. Now, ketosis is where the body burns fat for fuel instead of glucose, releasing acids called ketones into the blood and urine. And a little bit of ketones can be normal, but severe buildup of ketones can lead to a life-threatening condition called ketoacidosis. And we see diabetic ketoacidosis, in particular with those with type 1 diabetes. And we can even sometimes see it in type 2 diabetes, like with severe stress infection or something like that, but we do not see it with type 5. And so this actually helps us to differentiate type 5 diabetes from the others. The World Health Organization first acknowledged this condition, the malnutrition-related diabetes, as its own category in 1985, but removed it in 1999 because there wasn't enough evidence at the time to show that malnutrition directly caused diabetes. But since then, new research has transformed how we think about this condition. In 2022, Dr. Meredith Hawkins of Albert Einstein College of Medicine and colleagues conducted advanced metabolic testing in a group of Asian Indian men. After ruling out all other known forms of diabetes, they confirmed that a subset of participants had a clear, distinct pattern that aligned with malnutrition-related or type 5 diabetes. Their findings showed that individuals with type 5 diabetes have a profound defect in their ability to secrete insulin. And this is very different from type 2 diabetes, as we just learned, which is driven primarily by insulin resistance. So these results challenge longstanding beliefs and show that type 5 diabetes needs to be understood and treated as its own condition. Type 5 diabetes develops when long-term undernutrition during childhood or even during fetal development prevents the pancreas from growing properly. Researchers estimate that 20 to 25 million people worldwide may be affected, particularly in regions where malnutrition is widespread. And symptoms can be hard to spot because many of them, like fatigue, hunger, and weight loss, overlap with the signs of undernutrition itself. There are currently no clear treatment guidelines, although early evidence suggests that very small doses of insulin combined with oral medications may be the most effective treatment strategy. Giving too much insulin can actually be dangerous for people with this condition, which is one of the reasons why correctly diagnosing type 5 diabetes is so important. Nutrition may also play a major role in treatment. Some experts believe that higher protein intake and lower carbohydrate intake could help, along with addressing vitamin and micronutrient deficiencies, but more research is definitely needed in this regard. A global working group has now been formed to develop formal diagnostic and treatment guidelines for diabetes type 5 over the next 2 years. And raising awareness is a critical first step, especially because this condition primarily affects people in communities with limited access to healthcare and nutrition resources. As Dr. Hawkins noted, recognizing type 5 diabetes is an important step towards addressing a health problem that has quietly affected millions. You might be wondering why this condition is being categorized as type 5 diabetes, especially since we've only talked about types 1 and 2 so far. And the reason is that there are other proposed diabetes categories holding the 3 and 4 spot that researchers are studying, even though they're not officially recognized as of yet. For instance, some scientists use the term type 3 diabetes to describe a possible link between insulin resistance in the brain and Alzheimer's disease. Others have suggested the idea of type 4 diabetes, which refers to insulin resistance that develops in lean older adults and appears to be related to the aging process. These proposed types illustrate how much of our understanding of diabetes is expanding as research continues. Recognizing malnutrition-related diabetes as type 5 follows the same movement towards more precise classification and better care for people whose diabetes does not fit the traditional patterns. And although type 5 diabetes is most common in low and middle income countries, it also likely has important implications here in the United States. And we will be learning more about those now that this has been designated, and we'll all be learning more about it. So for starters, we know that many immigrant communities have members who have experienced childhood malnutrition before arriving in the United States. And so some may be living with a form of diabetes that does not behave like type 1 or 2, so we should have a high index of suspicion for type 5. But without awareness of type 5, these individuals are often misdiagnosed, and they may receive treatment plans that are not appropriate or safe for their condition. And furthermore, while type 5 is often linked to undernutrition in global contexts, clinicians here in the United States should consider this diagnosis in other vulnerable populations with a history of chronic or early life nutritional deficiency. So this could include among those who've experienced homelessness during pregnancy or in early childhood, and also those who may maintain a very strict or restrictive diet. And given the current climate, including cuts to SNAP benefits that affect food security for millions of American families, I think the potential for malnutrition-related illnesses may unfortunately become more relevant. So just something for us to be alert towards. These areas are where I think we're going to need further research, further study, further screening. Better recognition can help prevent complications and ensure that these patients receive care that's tailored to their unique circumstances and physiology. And the need for tailored care and prevention brings us back to the importance of proactive health measures. especially as we approach our holiday season. With travel and gatherings increasing, now's the time to focus on how we can all stay safe and protect one another over the coming weeks and months. If your holiday plans include traveling, remember that airports, airplanes, public transportation are areas of high mixing, often poorly ventilated as well. So consider masking up by wearing a high quality filtration mask like an N95 or KN95 to avoid picking up and passing along a contagious illness. If you're hosting, consider implementing pre-gathering testing, especially if you'll be hosting those who've traveled to be there. This is a highly effective layer of protection to prevent your event from becoming a super spreader. Also, just like you prepare your meal ahead of time, prepare your household and your home. In addition to testing, consider your indoor air quality. If you have central air, switch the fan setting to on, not auto, to ensure continuous air circulation and filtration. If not, consider placing HEPA filtration units in your shared areas. We know that as it gets cold, we tend to close our windows, but opening them slightly can help a lot. Even opening them for 10 to 15 minutes every hour can dramatically reduce the amount of shared air you're breathing. And finally, as we enter this busy time of year, remember to prioritize your core wellness. Eat a balanced diet, manage those stress levels, and get a good night's sleep. This concludes today's People's Health Briefing. Thank you so much for joining us. We will be taking next week off, so we will see you back on December 9th. See you then.